Hello, everybody. I'm wondering whether some of your names might be familiar to me because I used to work in North Yorkshire. In fact, I was even the vice chair of the North Yorkshire Forum for Voluntary Organisations, which is now Community First Yorkshire. So being here today with you is actually taking me right back in time. And and I'm sure that some of your names are familiar. And certainly the organisations are. And so just to give you a bit about me, I actually live on Anglesey now, but I still chair two trusts, both of which are in England. So I'm in the furthest point, but never mind, technology, eh? So just briefly, my world for 40 years was councils for voluntary service in Yorkshire, various parts of Yorkshire, including particularly significantly in Craven district, in Craven Voluntary Action, which some of you may well know, may remember. And I was one of the co-founders of the Craven Trust, which I'll come back to. And I think this trust is going to be the most relevant to you. And I also have been involved as a trustee for decades of various organisations. And I worked for the National Lottery Charities Board in the 1990s, which is where I definitely cut my teeth about what it looks like to be a funder. And it actually changed it really improved my understanding of the sector, as we called it, the sector, the voluntary sector. So I'm now a trustee of 3 trusts, organised charities, 2 of which are giving out grants. And so I've always been on both sides of the fence, if you know what I mean. So I have got that hands-on experience and many bitter learning curves with failures as well. A lot of those. What I'd love to know is, I don't know if you know how to use the hands up button, but if you can you show me how many people have heard of the Craven Trust? Are you able to do this? Either raise I don't know, if you can't use the hand button, use your own. I can't see everybody, they're not showing themselves, so there's just some of you, okay. Have any of you whose faces I can see actually applied to the Craven Trust? No, okay, right. Well, please forgive me if I'm telling you everything you know. But I don't know about you, but even as an old hand fundraiser for large organisations, Keighley Voluntary Services being the last one, I still failed many times and learned bitter lessons. But now I'm on the other side, I can tell you and myself. So the aim of the presentation is really to just state the obvious things you all know, but we all, in my experience, need reminding. I don't know, because I can't ask you now very quickly, how many of you have actually done any grant, raised funds for projects and things, because maybe some of you haven't, maybe some of you have done loads. So I'm afraid I'm just going to have to pitch it the best I can. So I'm going to introduce the 2 trusts, but unfortunately, having done a bit more homework, the Veolia Environmental Trust actually isn't you're not eligible for it, but I'm hoping that just 1 or 2 words about it might be useful anyway, and you might know somebody who is eligible and you can tell them. So first of all, can we have the slide, please, which just shows the Craven Trust. Now, can I see it?
Certainly. I'm just going to set that up now. And we have had a few answers. We had 3 people raising their hands for those who've applied.
Good.
And got an organisation called Selfer saying they've applied to the Craven Trust and the Beamsley Trust.
Great. Yes, I'll come to both in a minute. Okay, so that's the title, but it could wander around that. Okay, can we have slide 2, please? Right. Now, the Craven Trust was set up about 25 years ago by a small handful of people, including me. And it's got a very strange boundary, and this is really important, as with all grant makers. This boundary is the old archdeaconry boundary, because we were closely allied with the Archdeacon of Craven, was one of our founder members. So it covers all of Craven district, a little bit of Lancashire, a bit of Bradford district, particularly Keighley, Haworth, and those sort of places. And our little office base, which is actually somebody's house, is in Skipton. But the most important thing to consider about the Craven Trust is that we're covering very rural areas and very rural communities, and also very urban, urban communities with mixed race, mixed issues, huge contrast between the two sorts of areas, and therein lies some interesting challenges for us. Our trustees, unfortunately, don't necessarily reflect the whole area at the moment. Anyway, what you might want to know most is what we give money for. We give money to small organizations. We only give out 35,000 or so a year, our fund permitting. So we're talking hundreds, not thousands on the whole. We can give £1,500, but rarely more, very rarely more than that, very unusually. We have actually got two trusts. The Craven Trust is the one that gives out to groups, and the Beamsley Trust, which we took on in 99, I think it was, we can give money to individuals. Now, this is quite a challenge for trustees. And for those of you who might think of applying for somebody's individual needs, or even a group of people who have, say, learning disabilities, and there's maybe some project around a swimming classes or something, we would use the Beamsley Trust funds for that. Now, the thing about the Beamsley Trust is that if you're applying for an individual, and this is really important, we have a different application form to use, and you have to go through a referring agency. So we have a number of organizations locally that we know, and we want to get to know more. So you might be able to help us with that, whereby Mrs. X is desperate for some funding to, I don't know, replace her washing machine and all the rest of it. And she has a very difficult family with lots of major issues and absolutely no money. But she has to go to, say, the Carers Resource or some other organisation to ask for help, and probably is getting some help from them already with any luck. And they do the referral. So we do not make grants directly to people, to individuals. You might want to ask me later what the challenges are of that. I think it's quite an interesting discussion to have, and I think I ought to keep moving now, but I'd like to park that as an issue for trustees when you're giving out grants to individual people, and some of the pitfalls for us. What I should have said at the beginning is that my talk's very much through the eyes of a trustee. Now, with the Craven Trust, all applications come in online. I'm online these days. We're quite trendy, actually. We're quite modern. We do everything online. And our administrator, Rowena, sifts the applications like all organizations. Somebody sifts them. So for me, this is a major point to remember, that you have to use the processes we've got, and always use the process that people are stating on their websites, because if you don't, it only irritates us. And also, unless you've got it, if you've got a question, that's fine, because that's part of the offer, that you can actually ring up and talk to somebody. So in terms of the Craven Trust, we can most of our grants go to helping people sort out new heating systems, faulty I don't know, furniture that's fallen to pieces, or it might be swimming lessons for disabled people, as I said, or that we do also, sorry, lost my words, senior moment, or it might be a festival up in the Dales. And all I can certainly take some questions later. That might be easier rather than rambling now. So we do not make grants out of the area, and we definitely want to cover all the area, which we are not at the moment. So if your organization is operating, and I use the word operating in the Craven Trust area, you might be able to go for our funds for something small and modest. If you're a national organization, we have to be clear that you are specifically doing something in our patch. So if it was, for example, to send a carer on a retreat to give her some space, or him some space for a few days, we'd have to know exactly what was going on. Obviously, no names mentioned, everything's confidential. But bear in mind, if you're a large organization operating, based outside, but actually needing to do something in our patch, really think about how you're going to prove to us that you really are operating there, and not just putting it into your coffers for something else. Can you move the next slide on, please?
Yeah.
I'm sure there'll be some questions mounting up. So there's the application timetable, which I won't linger on now because you can find them on the website. But going back to the trustees, the viewpoint of a trustee, we actually assess all the applications ourselves. We don't, because it's a very voluntary-led organisation, so which is very different from Veolia. So Rowena will do some sifting, send us all the stuff, and then we allocate the things between us. So the trustees are very in touch with their area, and I think this makes us a very hands-on and accessible trust. And I hope you will agree. So can you move to the next slide, please? It's just a sort of hallelujah one. It's the standard hurrah, we got our new kit for our football club team. Okay, can we move on? Better move on to Veolia because I can see the time is ticking by. Veolia is a national funder, and I don't know how many of you will have heard of the landfill communities tax and the landfill communities funds, but if you are you can see that the next slide will show you what the criteria are, but this is the map of England, and these blobs on the map show you where our sites are, our landfill site, not ours, sorry, Veolia PLC, I should say. Next time you see the dustbin lorry, have a look and see what the name is on. It might be Biffa, it might be Veolia, it might be Suez, but if it's Veolia, then you can imagine, and this is a common theme across the country, that Veolia has a community environmental trust, which is a separate charity. And I'm the chair of that charity, but we have an interesting, very close and necessary relationship with Veolia PLC. And there we bring big business together, big business brains together with charity focused trustees. And together we make the final decisions about the bids that come through. So with the Craven Trust, you've got a very small group of trustees, very hands-on DIY. The Veolia Environmental Trust, we have a small team of extremely expert staff who sift our applications according to very specific criteria, and the trustees between them give the final say-so. I'm not sure whether anybody, when they're doing a bid, actually thinks what these bids look like to the trustees who make those decisions. And I think this is one of my messages. Think about what the trustees are seeing in front of them. They might be getting your full application. Actually, with the Veolia, we don't. We get a potted version of it with recommendations and scoring. If it's the Craven Trust, we see the whole thing. But think what it's like for trustees sitting around a table with a load of bids that all look interesting and all look relevant, and we've got to make some final decisions because we've only got a certain amount of money. So I could talk to you about the Landfill Communities Fund and tell you a bit more about what it is. So we can save that for the last session if you want that. But this is just to give you a taste that landfill community funds can be very useful for particularly environmental, for environmental projects or biodiversity projects. I'm using jargon, sorry. But using the word environmental, and this applies to all grant makers, I believe, I would hope, that the use of the word environmental is actually quite flexible. Environmental improvements can be anything from huge landscape, a wetland restoration, or it can be restoring a community centre in the middle of Birmingham, which is falling to pieces with rotten damp, and they need new heating systems and so on. And I'm going to give you some other hints on that subject in a minute. So can we go to the next slide, please? You need to tell me when half an hour is up, please.
I will do.
I don't know when I started now. I lost track.
We started at 2:15, we're now at 2:30.
Okay, not doing too badly then. So this is just a quick slide, which comes from the Veolia Environmental Trust team. Lizzie, who's an extremely good grants manager, and as Rowena is an extremely good administrator. And where would trustees be without good administrators, I say, all over the place. So the trust here, you'll see, is what it concentrates on. And we do have to conform to extremely rigid criteria. One thing you have to do, and I'll tell you now about that fund, excuse me, is that it runs out at the end of the year. The government gives back a certain amount of money to these trusts in return for helping the communities who are placed around within a certain reach of the landfill sites. in compensation, basically, to compensate for the disruption. And but that's tax money, and it's not like having a pot like most big charities do. We haven't got reserves and millions we can dig into. We have a finite amount of money each year. Oddly enough, that's the same as the Craven Trust, whose money comes from investments. So understanding where trusts get their money from properly, and actually thinking about what their constraints are, putting yourself in the trust's shoes or the trustee's shoes, again, I say it again, is quite important and quite useful, I think. Okay, next slide, please. Oh, is this the last one? Well, this one can stay up. We'll come back later if you like. This is the website addresses for the two organisations. As I said, Veolia probably isn't any use to you, but you can at least have a look through, because it'll, there might be some useful hints. I just want to go back now to common mistakes, if I may. So you might want to take that slide down again, Amy, and we'll bring it back later. Is that okay? Thanks. Pause for breath. I hope you're doing okay. Heaven knows if I'm telling you what you want to know, but anyway, here we go. Common mistakes. Oh, this comes from the heart. Ones I've learned and ones I've had to put up with. The guidelines. Is this the right funder for you? Have you checked that you fit with the criteria? So many people don't. They don't look, they try, and I've done it myself. I have tried to weave my own project around what I think the funder could want. If in doubt, ring them up and find out. Remember that others are reading it. Does it make sense? Understand the assessment process. If you really do understand what the process is, again, the Craven Trust is very simple, but it's still a process. There are still people making decisions and comparing you with somebody else. Hasty applications. Is there more to the project that we need to know about? Have you told us the right things? I mean, so many people, especially with the Craven Trust, and I understand this because I've been there and done it, that a lot of organizations put in bids without much experience. And so they're not used to putting, and sometimes putting it down for the first time. And I have huge sympathy with that. I'm not condemning that, but just try to think a bit more about whether you're getting all the information across that somebody else will understand and will make an easy judgment about. Is there more to the project that we need to know about? Have you got a bigger picture? For example, if you've got a village hall and you're asking for, say, new chairs because they're all rickety, is this part of a big renovation project? Have you told us about the whole thing? Because we like to see the pattern. So, for example, and we've had them. We had one from a church tower. So the spire was going to fall down. It was a community space in the middle. But we also heard that the roof needed doing. Well, why didn't we know both at once? And then we could sort of make a choice about which bit we could afford to fund or whatever. So give trustees the whole picture and show that you've thought it out throughout the whole project. Right, okay, we're going to renovate this building. This is stage 1, this is stage 2, etc. So those projects, which are defined like that, people can put that sort of plan together, are really helping the trustees to understand you and what you're trying to achieve. And this is true of Veolia or anything else I've been involved in. Quite often people are just thinking about the boiler, thinking about the roof, thinking about the floor, and not thinking about how to tie it all up. I think the reason is quite often because people are afraid to ask for any more, or they think they're being greedy or it will spoil their application. But if we know what you need and you say this is the most urgent, but that's the next, we can then prioritize, and we might only be able to give you £300, but we want to make sure it's the most useful £300. Are you considering the external environment? Now, I haven't got time to do this now. We can talk it later, but if you want. But this is about my point about environment in the general sense. But more and more, even with little ones like the little Craven Trust, and definitely with Veolia, we're really pushing people now to think about alternative energy. So if you're going to have a new boiler in your village hall, think about, do I have to have a savings like for like? Can I actually take the plunge and get something else which is going to be environmentally friendly and actually ultimately reduce my costs? I think there's still an awful lot of awareness raising to do about this. And I mean, for example, here in our cottage in Anglesey, it's our second cottage in Anglesey, we've got an air source heat pump, and the government is giving about £7,000 back, £400 a quarter. So we're getting most of our money back. because we're helping the environment. So it's really worth being adventurous for those of you who've not thought about this sort of thing and thinking about the whole picture about how can we make our buildings more sustainable and more eco-friendly. Now, I know that that sometimes means a bit more money, but trusts like the Veolia would rather you spent a bit more on an air source heat pump or a ground pump, you know, or solar panels than just doing like for like. And eventually we'll make it a rule, you know, we'll make that a criterion. And are you giving enough facts about the need and about the project? We need facts, facts, facts. We don't need lots of blurb, we need facts. Incomplete details and answers. Get someone else to check it before you send it in, please. It's not so much the typos, it's the missing information. Why didn't they tell us that they haven't got a lease on that land? You know, or have they got a lease on that land? And how long is the lease? Who owns the land? If you're having a new playground done, for example. Lots of wonderful projects, but why, you know, all over the place. But sometimes they haven't quite got those basic details sorted first. So look at what we need first before you start. Rambling descriptions, I'm good at those, and justifications. Please, please state things clearly. And we had the lottery used to drive us bonkers in the 90s as well. What do you want? Why do you want it? How are you going to use it, do the project? When are you going to do it? And I'm saying this fiercely. Other funders, don't just tell us you might go to somebody else if you need more funding, or if someone demands match funding. Tell us who it is and how likely it is you're going to get it, or if you've got it already. It's really important. A lot of funders don't like to be the first one, but the Craven Trust tries to help by sometimes kickstarting people's projects, and just knowing that somebody's given you £1,000 does help. Veolia, we have more complex criteria around how much we give. And again, I'm not going to go into that now. Accurate costings, please. Accurate costings and quotes, 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 if people ask for them. So I think I'm nearly at the end of it. I think I'm going to give you a chance to answer some questions in a minute. So why do you deserve the grant instead of someone else? Imagine sitting in front of 80 grants applications, which have already been sifted and gone through a grilling scoring process. And here I'm thinking about Veolia, not Craven Trust. And they've got past the sort of the basics. So why yours? What's going to make it stand out? Inevitably, a lot of projects are very similar. Inevitably, you know, renovating, I said back to village halls and things, renovating village halls are all very standard things that need to happen. But try and give us as much as you can on what the community is going to benefit from. And this is true of any grant. And I've fallen foul. Have you actually got proof that people want you to do this, that they're going to use it, whatever it is that you're offering to do? So often people, I remember even recently I got into trouble with the lottery for not being able to prove that the young people out there, as I was claiming they might, would actually do think that what we were doing is a good idea. And it's a classic way of falling down with a bid with any funder. And with the Craven Trust, you have to be really sure that if it is a church building, that you're really showing it is for community use. And it's a good amount of community use as well. But we do understand that very rural communities have to rely on their church buildings for community activities. We know that. So I think I'm going to stop there and just say, imagine reading it as the staff member who accepts your application and has to do something with it and then send it to the trustees. And remember, but every project is special in its way, but some are better expressed than others and better researched than others. So less rambling, more facts, and very clear, simple descriptions, please. Good luck. Any questions?
Thanks so much, Caroline. So we've got one person who's mentioned in chat that she'd be keen to ask a question, and that is Tamsin. So Tamsin, you want to unmute yourself and ask a question to Caroline? It's probably the best way.
I didn't ask a question. I asked if you'd be touching on Veolia, because at the beginning I was.
Oh, okay. Because
you were talking about Craven, because that's why I was here. But yes, I guess just any advice. We're going to put in, Veolia have got a funding round that ends today, and we're doing an exciting project in a local community in Leeds, I should say.
But where are you?
In Leeds. I know I'm supposed
Oh,
to be in
Leeds.
North
Ah,
Yorkshire,
well, in
but
that case, oh, I was told no,
I'm an
no one.
interloper.
Ah, well, no, that's all right. Oh, that's confused me. I was told nobody was coming from West Yorkshire, which was my last patch. Oh, well, in that case, help. Have you talked to Lizzie, who's the grants?
No, and I was actually wondering, that would be a question actually, if you could.
What's your question? I might not be able to answer it.
Well, I didn't really have any questions. It was
Oh, I
just
see.
because I wasn't sure if you'd be touching on Veolia today because you were.
Well, I could do, but I wasn't sure whether it was, as I didn't realise anyone would actually be, it was really, what,
But yeah, just I guess top tips, I suppose, if while you're here.
okay, right, Veolia.
Slides be
Right.
shared.
Okay, Veolia, we're getting much hotter on people proving that they are actually thinking about sustainability, the climate, planet, everything. It's really important. I'm obviously not now going to ask you what you're applying for. I don't think it would be appropriate, but if you wanted to email me, I could. Did you say it's going in today?
No, we actually decided to push back because we
Right.
found the whole thing about the land.
Right. Good.
Yes, we're
Absolutely.
going to get really strong permission from the council.
You need it in writing.
Yeah.
And that's true of any of you, by the way, whoever you're applying to, well, it should be true anyway. I think it might be better if you email, if we can talk later. I don't mind doing that.
I think as well, just some advice from somebody who's tried to apply and not to push back is just if you're working with a local council, to leave loads of time if you are going to go for
absolutely. You're very good point.
We're struggling to get
yeah.
permissions, basically.
Yeah, that's a very good message for everybody if you're doing anything with the council, but I suspect most of the smaller applications for the trust, the Craven Trust would not be doing that. But if you are for a bigger project, like the sort of thing you might be talking about, yes, absolutely. Give much more time. And especially now with the COVID and the pandemic and Brexit, everybody, however big or small your project, we're having to be much more flexible as funders because of time. Because as you may know, wood has gone up, doubled in price since people first put their bids together. It's taking twice as long or longer to get the actual materials you need, and it's really holding people back. So we've had to learn to be much more patient when we're doing monitoring and stuff and say, okay, all right, you can have another year's extension. And that's true of all of us. It's a really tricky time for everybody doing particularly practical projects like that. And that's true of Veolia, yeah. But Tamsin, seriously, if you want to ask any more questions, I'll be happy to help because I'm sorry if I can. But when in doubt, ring up Lizzie.
Thank you. Thanks, Caroline.
Okay.
Thanks, Caroline. We've got another question in the chat box. So it's from Wish. Wish, if you'd like to say your question in person, do unmute yourself. Otherwise, I'm happy to read it if you stay unmuted. If you stay muted for a few seconds. All right, I will read out the question from Wish, and it says, Caroline, how do you recommend people get across the points that you've made when there's a very limited word count? Oh,
that's a meanie. Yes, I hope we haven't got one on our Craven Trust forms. I haven't actually used one. How do you get across it? Well, my trick is all sorts of tricks. Take out all the ands and buts, use bullet points, write bad grammar, and just bash it out in sort of rather abrupt terms, and don't worry about making nice long sentences. But honestly, take out commas and, just do anything you can to slash out the unnecessary words. Edit, and then get someone else to read it and say, does it make sense? But I use bullet points a lot, and it's so much easier for someone who's looking at funding applications. Please, bullet points, they're wonderful things, because then you can see quickly at a glance what people are talking about. I think that's all I can say on that one, but I've designed a new language for those limited, I was doing one with a professor of something the other day. We were co-writing, and he said, I just invented a new language. He found it very difficult to do it himself, but I've learned tricks over the years.
Fantastic. Thanks so much for that, Caroline. I'm just waiting, and we've got a thank you in the chat box from Wish as well, who said they don't have a mic, so that's why they can't thank you in person. Just waiting for more questions to come in. I've got one in the meantime. Caroline, can you share some of your favourite or some really successful case studies with us? Some groups that really stand out?
You've really caught me out now. It's the sort of thing I'm hopeless at remembering, because we've done so many applications in the last, looked at so many applications in the last 40 years. When you say, you mean because it was a wonderful project or because it was a wonderful application?
probably projects that have really inspired you. Or...
Oh dear, that's a mean question.
Sorry.
I mean, well, no, I'm going to generalize it because that's a way out. The ones that are most moving are the individual Beamsley Trust ones, where we have to consider the most appalling situations of people's lives. I mean, unbelievable what lessons we have learned about what happens to people. It's just heartrending. And we have to steel ourselves to be as objective as possible and to probe as much as we feel is appropriate into people's finances. It's really, really awful, and things that people are dealing with. So just for example, there was this is just one of hundreds of examples. So for example, somebody who's being rehoused after being in prison and is being given a home by Yorkshire, whatever they call themselves now. I used to be involved in them. Yorkshire, anyway, sorry, Foundation Housing it used to be called. And they have nothing. They have no money. They've got a bad track record. They've been, been or are addicts, and they are not connected with life. They need a lot of help. They have nothing, and they're disorganized. So you give them a bed, just a bed or a carpet or something, knowing that somebody else is going to help them to set up their lives. Those sort of stories. Or the mother who's looking after 3 children with extremely severe learning difficulties and autism and everything, and has their own mental health problems, struggling and struggling and struggling, and the washing machine's broken down, and we do it instantly. You can make an instant difference. So those are the sort of things that particularly strike chords, and we have some agonizing situations and difficult decisions, very difficult situations sometimes to consider, and shouldn't we, and all the rest of it. So I think those are the ones that sort of strike a chord most. But it's also exciting to see with the Veolia one that we're helping to restore the wetlands of crumbs. Where was it? Outside Manchester somewhere, where we have fascinating dilemmas and wonderful arguments. Should we fund protecting a certain butterfly, or helping a community whose building has fallen to pieces in the middle of, I keep saying, Birmingham? So it's the humans versus the animals, bearing in mind what's happening to the world, the planet. So it can be very interesting being a trustee, and I recommend it. Grant making is a really interesting thing to do.
Thanks, Caroline. We've got another question here in the chat box. It says, as someone who's just starting to write grants, what advice would you give to the novice grant applicants?
I might suggest, if you've never done it before, can you find someone else who has done it before, who can actually read what you're doing, send them draft applications. Your draft, do your wording on paper first. Don't start with filling in the form. Whatever you do, hopefully, if it's a horrible electronic form, I hate those, the interactive ones. Usually you're allowed to cut and paste and go from Word to the form. And I think it's important that you do that. Very important. So write it all on paper first, and start by thinking. Just write it all down. Just describe your project in any old how you want. But I think it's very important that you think about why we're doing this, and what is it part of? What's the organisation? Because a lot of people's organisations, we find, are sometimes sort of not really ready behind the scenes. They might be brand new, and they haven't actually got a track record, which is very tricky. That's a challenge. You've got to start somewhere. So if you're brand new organisation and brand new to fundraising, ring up the person who's running the trust and ask for their help first before you start. We just launched this little project or this organisation 3 weeks ago, and we want to do this. It's not easy getting money to do startup, but I would actually ring up and ask, but also just write it all down and then start to hone it down in relation to the questions. Read the questions and ask for help from Community First Yorkshire if they have anyone to help you.
Thank you, Caroline. Yes, absolutely. Community First Yorkshire are here. We've got the Community Support North Yorkshire team who can help you with your funding applications, be a critical friend during that process, make sure your funding ready. So absolutely, thanks for that.
But read the guidelines first, read the criteria, and ask someone else to help you interpret them if you're not quite sure how to do that.
Very much so. Thanks, Caroline. Still waiting for more questions to come through on the chat, or if somebody would like to raise their hand, we'll look out for your hand in the participant box and call your name out. I've got another one. You touched on it a bit earlier, Caroline. You said it's really important that people get quotes.
Yes.
How many quotes would you expect an organisation to get for the same activity for one of your grants?
Usually it's stated in a website's guidelines. With the Veolia Trust, and sometimes it's only an amount over a certain amount. So, for example, it might be quotes for anything more than £1,000 value, for example. So you just have to go by the guidelines. If you're not sure, find out. But I would say generally get 3 for anything. But this is only just generalization. I mean, if it was a washing machine, I'd a couple of quotes, you know, because we can, our treasurer, actually it happens, is very quick and checks online and sometimes finds cheaper ones that work just as well. But if it's a really big grant, I mean, you know, if you're doing building works and things, then you need to be much more thorough about your quotes. And we want to make sure that you've got the quotes. You know, don't just say the builder down the road is quoted about £6,000 or £25,000. You need to be more accurate than that. And a breakdown is nice. So the more thorough you are, the happier the trustees are.
Fantastic. Another one here for you, Caroline. What are your reporting requirements for people who are successful getting the grant?
Oh, with the Craven Trust, we ask that people advertise us, because the Craven Trust actually does need help. But in fact, come on, guys, we need help, because we've only got a very part-time administrator, and we could really, you know, if we could we would have maybe a development offer or something. But we need anybody who receives a grant, we ask them to, we can't force them to have a sticker or you know, or put us on a program of events or some way of advertising what we've done, and certainly acknowledge we do monitor people. We send out requests after 6 months. Of course, a lot of people don't fill them in. It's a classic problem. Veolia, as far as I know, it doesn't. I should know this. It doesn't have. I only just become the chair, by the way. Doesn't have specific rules, but some do. I remember when I did up a massive project in Keighley. If you go for European funding, you had to, you know, sort of 6-foot placard outside. So just be careful that you don't forget if there is a requirement. And you know, we need your help advertising. You know, you can be an ambassador for us. So I'm sorry, that wasn't a very specific answer.
No, that was great. Thank you. Can you let people know if you pay the grants up front, or if there's a payment scheme with the grants when people are successful?
Well, what we do with the Craven Trust is that we pay by invoice generally, unless it's an organisation we know very well, and we make a judgment call and we might give them a grant. But generally speaking, the Craven Trust, because they're small amounts, insists on an invoice, yeah, and we pay it, and so on. So the treasurer deals with it that way. With Veolia, they are grants, and we have funding agreements which are very complex, and you can't start your project until the funding agreement has been agreed, and then we pay the grant according to the funding agreement, which will vary according to the project. But we don't pay on invoice. We don't pay the invoices for that, generally speaking. So it varies enormously according to each trust, and you need to check it out first. One thing you do need to remember is if some trusts only give you money in retrospect after, you know, sometimes it's about reclaiming. So you need to make sure you've got enough money in the bank to cover your costs. If it's one of those retrospective payment schemes. It's not true of the Craven Trust, but generally speaking, but that can trip people up badly, because you suddenly think, oh God, I've got to pay the builder £3,000, we haven't got it. And then of course you get insolvency issues.
Thanks very much. We've got another question in the chat box. It says, if people are unsuccessful, can they contact you for feedback?
Which trust are you talking about? Or just any generally? Craven Trust?
I think probably Craven Trust. Craven, yes.
Okay. Well, this is where, as an applicant, I get cross about not getting feedback, because I think feedback's really important, because you can learn from feedback. So I think if you're really agitated about not getting enough, we always send out letters or something, and they don't say much, I have to say. But if you feel really desperate for some proper feedback, I think the best thing to do is to email and say, but say it nicely. Sorry, I'm sure you would, you guys, but sometimes, sometimes we get quite abusive applicants. I'm absolutely certain you wouldn't be, but sometimes we get hassled, and people sort of become demanding and think that it's their right to have a grant, and why haven't I got it? I experienced that when I worked for the lottery. It was quite disturbing, actually. But nobody can claim they deserve a grant, really, except maybe some of those poor people with individual situations going on. So I think ask politely if you could have a bit more help. And in my case, I would certainly ring you up or write to you in the Craven Trust. I don't think you'd have any problem with Veolia. I mean, Veolia doesn't generally, but the grants team is very interactive. So ring them up and say, as I said, just be nice and ask for help.
Thank you. And the person who shared the question says thank you as well. You mentioned that you've got an online application form and you ask people to really read the questions and be as concise as possible. Is there any supporting documentation that you expect as part of the online application, and what types of documents are they?
It will tell you in the guidelines what you're supposed to send in. Yes, absolutely. I mean, we still do get some hard copy ones for people who because, understandably, not everybody's got the right technology. So, if in doubt, print it off and fill it in. But please make sure your handwriting is clear enough to read. And repeat applications, we quite often get repeat applications, actually, particularly Craven Trust, especially when people are doing bitty projects. But don't forget to rewrite what you wrote before about who you are, and don't just assume that we know you, because there might be different trustees, there might be new people. Again, think about the trustees. So I think, I'm sorry, but every guideline's got different, but you read, it always is, read the guidelines. If in doubt, ring up.
Thanks for that. Another one, do you have any particular projects or project theme areas that you're really focusing on in the next 12 months, perhaps in the context of the pandemic, or anything else that's happening around the world at the moment?
Well, that's an interesting question. One can have a big debate about that. Actually, the Craven Trust, we often debated about whether we should actually focus on one particular group of people or one particular issue. And we've decided with such a small trust and a very open trust that we want to remain as open and accessible as possible. But we've sort of skewed it a bit so that we're particularly interested in youth and mental health. And mental health is becoming a very prominent theme, as it should, amongst a lot of trusts. Veolia included, but Veolia has its own very specific criteria, which is all to do with landfill communities tax and about our regulator Trust, and we can't budge out of those. We have to interpret them very carefully. It's a bit of another kettle of fish, to be honest. But the Craven Trust, we can do anything we want within our objects, and we've decided not to target anything, but we have noticed a long gap, a very slow take up during the COVID pandemic. And now suddenly we're getting a bulge, because watch it, everybody, all the trusts will be getting a sudden bulge of applications because everyone's becoming more mobile, able to do things again. So be aware that suddenly everybody's waking up, so that we'll get more applications at once than usual, having had a little sort of quiet patch. So those who got it in the quiet patch probably did better because there was less competition. Yeah, this can be quite an issue, actually, and there are fewer funds around for small organisations as well. As someone who had been applying for funds for a geopark, there's nothing for us because everything is about COVID and people and the environment. Yeah, the environment and helping individuals is a very big pressure on that now. Craven Trust remains open-minded and flexible.
Thank you. Caroline, I was wondering if you'd be happy to share a little bit more about your inspiration behind being you're obviously part of so many different trusts. You've been involved, very, very hands-on and involved in this sector for a long time. Would you like to share anything about your motivations for doing that?
Well, as originally as part of the Council for Voluntary Service movement, if you want to call it better, you know, and loving it, I think I enjoyed the buzz of that, of being in the middle between the smaller local groups and members, for example, and others doing things, and all the stuff that was going on at local grassroots level, which is so inspiring, so inspiring. And then being in the middle between that and local and the state, local government and national government. And I really got a buzz out of that tension, if you like, and desperately wanting to persuade the local authorities wherever I was working, and get later national government, because I was chair of NAVCA, National Association for Voluntary and Community Action. That whole business about arguing the case for the community sector. But I couldn't have done that if we hadn't been involved or had projects or worked with people who are doing the real work. So that's where my inspiration came from. What motivated me, and I knew that I learned that I was better suited to that kind of negotiation stuff, with that bashing heads together stuff, you know, or persuading NHS that giving money to us to the voluntary sector, not us particularly, to do projects that would benefit people was going to be more use than some of the things that the government said it should do. So it was sort of quite a political game, if you like, and we did some really interesting projects in Keighley, really interesting projects. So but in terms of the grant making, it's the buzz of helping an organisation to do what it needs to do. It's as simple as that. Or the person to get their fridge or their whatever. It's about helping people, but it's more directly satisfying and interesting, and you never ever stop learning. I mean, every grant round is, you know, you learn something. Thank you, guys.
Thank you for sharing that. Are there any hints you'd give people who are maybe just starting out in their charity journey and thinking of forming a charity or moving into the sector?
I could do quite a lot on that subject, but I think if I can make it simple and brief, I think you need I think you need to understand that it's worth following the rules, the basic rule. Well, the Charity Commission, look at the Charity Commission website and get an off the shelf constitution. And if you don't really, it drives me mad that trustees in so many organizations, and this is happening to me now, don't understand that those constitutions give you the rules by which you can operate. And if you don't operate by those rules, you have no sort of, you can actually go horribly wrong. And also, if you're a registered charity, you can get into trouble. But those rules have a use, they have a purpose. They make you keep focused on what you're doing. So be very clear about what you want to set up and why, and what you need to do in order to achieve those things, and to gather a small group of people around, and also quite often you get a charity set up by one person who's had a particular personal experience, and this can be fantastically inspiring, but sometimes there's such a burning need to do that for the rest of the world that they're not able to look objectively at what you need to do to run a charity. It's about being as objective and following the basic rules of your constitution, and for seeking help. But you do need to set yourselves up properly before you start applying for funding and thinking project, and think about what is realistic and long-term. What do you want to achieve in 3-5 years? Where do you see that organization being, and how are you going to get there? Project plans, long-term plans. Very difficult if you've never done it. You might need a bit of help. And I could go, this is a big area for me, so this is another talk. This is another talk.
Thanks, Caroline. Just to give everybody a quick time check, we're going into the last 10 minutes of the session now, so very keen.
Oh, I thought we'd finished. Oh, right. Oh, okay.
No,
I can do more on that. I could do more on that if you want, but it is a biggie. I mean, it's all right. Going right back to basics, and getting people to think objectively about what they're doing and why, and who's going to be involved, and being as democratic as possible, you know, gathering a group of people who are going to work together as a good, strong team to make this happen, whatever it is. And also making sure, as I said before, that the people out there want it. I want to start a new toddler group. Okay, are there enough toddlers around there who actually are going to use it? You know, is it actually going to be financially viable? We need to know that charities are going to be able to manage themselves and be sustainable, and they're not going to rely on a grant year by year by year, things like that. And the Craven Trust, no, we don't pay for people's salaries, but we do pay for volunteer training sessions. You know, again, think about what you're going to need and set it all out and be as clear and focused as possible. That's just, I can only talk in generalizations today, sorry.
That's fantastic. No, it's really, really great stuff. We do have another question in the chat box. It's from the Beamsley Project Charitable Trust saying, do you have any tips on inspiring people to become a trustee and join their organisation?
Oh, yes. Well, we need to get better at advertising, actually. And some trusts still don't like doing that. They like to pick and choose. I'm a great believer in opening up, and we'll be doing that with the Craven Trust soon, by the way, because we are quite low in numbers, whereas we're a great team. It's great fun. Yes, it can be fun, you know. We've got to have a sense of humour in life if you can. But well, Reach, there's an organisation called Reach, which is one way of offering your services, and then organisations might be saying, okay, the classic is we always need a new treasurer. If anybody's interested in being a treasurer, for goodness sake, tell somebody, because you'll be scooped up in no time. Treasurers are very rare and special trustees, so or people with those skills. So I think you need to think about first of all, what is it that you'll be taking to that team of people? What is your particular skill, expertise? What are you going to give to the trust, and what is it you're going to learn? You may not know what you're going to learn, but you do need to have an open mind and to be interested and in hearing and learning as you go. But I think it's also not being shy about knowing what you can offer. Because one of the things that quite often happens with trustee boards is that people don't actually get to know each other well enough. And one of the things I want to do as the new chair of Veolia, we all get on really well, but I don't really know them as individuals. So I'm going to make a point of getting to know people. And I've done that before, and realizing that the others didn't know each other. So as a chair or as a board, I think all trustees have a responsibility for not just going to the meetings, but thinking about making those relationships around the table that will make for a good team and good decisions and a good experience. If you don't enjoy doing it after you've tried it, then just say, sorry, it's not for me. Don't be afraid to step away. Don't be afraid to ask for help. And it takes a good 6 months, I think, and sometimes a year before a new trustee who's never done it before feels fully involved and fully confident and kind of relaxed about it all. Because especially with something big like the Veolia, it's quite a big thing to plunge into. It's quite a complex machinery. Craven Trust is much easier. But we do need, and if you've never had any grant making experience, then you might find that people are happy to take you on because you've got such expertise in another thing. We've got a new trustee at Veolia who's a civil servant, but he's very strong on climate stuff, on carbon stuff. And so he's already got involved in doing a presentation, even though he's never done grant making before. So, just think about where you best fit and find out about the other trustees if you can, if there should be something online. Not sure we've got anything on the Craven Trust one, actually, now I think about it. See who's there. Don't be daunted. Everybody's got something to offer.
And in terms of an existing trustee board, if they wanted to attract more people to them, have you got any tips around how to inspire people to come and join you?
Well, if you don't want to pay for advertisements, use your networks. Sorry, I mean, I'm not hopeless at social media. I don't do it, but if you're using social media, then use that. Use any medium you've got to spread the word out. It's worth thinking about what sort of trustee you want, actually. If you're advertising, it's worth doing first a bit of an exercise with your board to say, okay, we've got this talent, that talent, but we're missing that. It's nearly always marketing and money. Or business development or something. So think about what sort of trustee you need, and then you're not misleading people who might have an interest but not actually be as important, sorry, it sounds awful, as useful.
Thanks, Caroline. We're coming to the last few minutes of the session, so I do encourage anybody to speak up now if they are sitting on a question. Otherwise, Caroline, do you have any closing words for the group here today?
Oh heavens. I suppose I should have a summing up 3 points, shouldn't I? I think I've said them quite a lot already, but read the damn guidelines. Read the guidelines, ask for help, write clear, simple applications, the what, why, how, and when, and then in brackets also what other funding are you getting in if you need it, and are you sure have you done anything about it? But it's really the what, how, why, and when, and that would probably be the best message for someone starting out from scratch as well, even setting up a new organization. What am I doing? What do I want to do? Why do I want to do it? How am I going to do it? And when? Look at your timelines and that kind of thing. So it's standing back from what you're doing, I think, and not just plunging straight in and writing the application without standing back and thinking someone else is reading this.
Thank you, Caroline. That is wonderful advice and information. I'm sure everybody has really appreciated everything that you shared with us today.